Ethan Carter had traveled to many places in the galaxy, but nothing compared to the grand halls of the Zirathian palace. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a freelance explorer who sometimes took on transport jobs for high-paying clients. This time, his client was the Terran Council, and his mission was simple: deliver a message to the Zirathian queen and leave. But things had not gone as planned. The palace was a towering structure made of shimmering dark metal, surrounded by floating energy orbs that lit up the sky. Ethan had never seen anything so advanced, yet so elegant. The Zirathians were a powerful race, tall, strong, and known for their strict traditions. Their empire controlled half the galaxy, and their queen ruled with absolute power. And now Ethan stood before her. Queen Silara was unlike any alien he had met before. Tall, with smooth violet skin and glowing golden eyes, she carried an aura of strength and mystery. She was dressed in a flowing silver robe, a golden crown resting lightly on her dark, braided hair. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a warrior, a legend among her people. Ethan had expected a formal, cold interaction, but to his surprise, Silara was curious about him. "You are different from the other humans I have met," she had said, her voice smooth like flowing water. Ethan had smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." What was supposed to be a quick delivery of diplomatic terms had turned into an unexpected conversation. They spoke about the stars, about the war between their species that had ended only a decade ago, about how fragile peace could be. The more they talked, the more Ethan realized that Silara wasn't just a ruler. She was tired of war, tired of politics, tired of always being expected to be strong. One drink turned into two. Laughter replaced formality. Barriers broke. That night, deep in the royal palace, they shared something that should have never happened. A moment of weakness. A connection that defied logic. A night that neither of them could forget. But by the time Ethan woke up the next morning, she was gone. There was no note, no goodbye, no explanation. A royal attendant escorted him back to his ship, treating him as if nothing had happened. The Zirathians remained formal, distant. Silara did not see him again. Ethan left the planet confused but knew better than to ask questions. He was just a human. She was a queen. Whatever had happened between them was nothing more than a mistake, an accident. So he buried the memory. For years, he convinced himself that it was just one night, just an experience to laugh about later. He continued his life, traveling between planets, taking on dangerous jobs, and doing what he did best, surviving. But deep down, a part of him always wondered, did it mean something? Did it mean anything at all? He never got an answer. Not until the day she returned. And when she did, she wasn't alone. Ethan Carter had faced many dangers in his life. Pirates, bounty hunters, alien warlords, but nothing prepared him for what was happening now. He sat in the cockpit of his ship, the Horizon, casually sipping a cup of coffee as he traveled through deep space. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, just another routine job transporting rare minerals from a mining colony to a trade station. Then, out of nowhere, his ship's alarms started blaring. Warning: Unidentified vessel approaching. Ethan's fingers moved quickly over the control panel, trying to get a reading. His eyes widened when he saw the size of the ship appearing on his scanner. Massive, heavily armed, Zirathian design. He cursed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." Before he could react, his ship shuddered violently, and the engines died instantly. The Horizon was trapped in a powerful energy field, completely helpless against the superior technology of the Zirathian warship. A voice crackled over the comms. Deep, commanding. Familiar. "Ethan Carter, you will lower your defenses and prepare to be boarded. This is not a request." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew that voice. He hadn't heard it in years, but he could never forget it. Queen Silara. With a deep breath, he stood up and made his way to the cargo bay, where the docking sequence was already in progress. The doors hissed open, revealing a team of Zirathian royal guards in gleaming armor. And in the center of them stood her. Silara looked exactly as he remembered, tall, elegant, powerful. But something was different. She wasn't just here as a queen. She was here as a mother. And standing beside her was a young boy. Ethan's heart stopped. The child was half human, half Zirathian. He had Silara's violet skin and glowing golden eyes, but his face, his expression, was too much like Ethan's to ignore. The boy stared up at him with curiosity, tilting his head slightly, as if studying him. Ethan took a step forward, struggling to form words. "Who is?" Silara cut him off. "He is yours, Ethan, our son." The words hit him like a shockwave. His mind raced, trying to process what he just heard. "My son." He looked at the boy again, and this time, he could see it. The resemblance. The same sharp features. The same intense gaze. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You've got to be joking." Silara's expression remained unreadable. "I do not joke about matters of bloodline. His name is Calyx. He was born shortly after our encounter." Ethan felt like the floor had vanished beneath him. He had a son, and he never knew. Anger started to rise in his chest. "And you're telling me this now? After all these years?" Silara's golden eyes flickered with emotion, but her voice remained calm. "It was necessary. Calyx is of royal blood. Zirathian law demanded that he remain hidden until he was of age." Ethan scoffed. "Hidden? From his own father?" Silara's gaze hardened. "He is not just your son, Ethan. He is the future ruler of my empire. And I have come to take him home." Silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ethan looked at Calyx again. The boy met his gaze, unafraid, curious. Then he looked back at Silara. "No." The guards around her stiffened. Silara narrowed her eyes. "No." Ethan crossed his arms. "You can't just show up after all this time and expect me to hand over my son. I don't care what your laws say. He's my kid too." Silara's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, respect, annoyance. "You do not understand, Ethan. This is not a request. Calyx belongs with his people." Ethan took a step forward. "He belongs with his father too." Calyx watched the exchange in silence, his golden eyes darting between them. Then, for the first time, he spoke. "Do I not get a choice?" Both Ethan and Silara turned to look at him. His voice was clear, confident, too mature for his young age. Silara frowned. "It is not a matter of choice, Calyx. Your destiny is already decided." The boy looked up at Ethan. "Who are you?" Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He crouched down, leveling his gaze with Calyx. "I'm your father," he said softly. Calyx studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You look like me." Ethan chuckled. "No, kid, you look like me." A small, amused smile tugged at Calyx's lips. It was the first crack in his serious demeanor. Silara sighed. "Ethan, do not make this difficult. If you resist, you will only bring war upon your people." Ethan stood up, his expression firm. "I don't care what kind of empire you run. No one takes my son from me." The air in the cargo bay grew tense. The guards shifted uneasily, sensing the conflict ahead. Silara's eyes locked onto his. "You truly wish to fight me on this?" Ethan smirked. "You bet I do." For the first time, Silara's lips curled into a slight smile. "Then let us see how far you are willing to go." Ethan Carter stood frozen, his mind racing. His son stood in front of him, Calyx, a half-human, half-Zirathian child with golden eyes that burned with intelligence. His son. He had faced pirates, warlords, and bounty hunters. But this was something else. He turned to Queen Silara, still struggling to process everything. You kept him a secret from me for years, and now you expect me to just let you take him." Zalara remained calm. It was necessary. Ethan shook his head, his frustration growing. "Necessary? You had no right to decide that. I had a right to know." Calix stood between them, watching the argument like it was a game of chess. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes flicked between them, calculating. He was smart, too smart for his age. Finally, Calix spoke, his voice clear and steady. "Why are you fighting over me?" Ethan exhaled and crouched down, trying to meet the boy's gaze. "Because I didn't know you existed, kid. And now that I do, I'm not letting you go." Calix studied him carefully, then tilted his head. "You don't look like a warrior." Ethan smirked. "I don't have to. I just have to win." Zalara crossed her arms. "You cannot win this, Ethan. Calix is not just any child. He carries royal blood. He is the heir to my empire." Ethan looked back at Calix, who still showed no emotion. He had the posture of a prince, but there was something else beneath it. A quiet curiosity, a hunger for answers. Ethan straightened up, facing Zalara. "I don't care if he's an heir to your empire, or the king of the whole galaxy. He's still my son, and I won't let him be taken away from me." Zalara's golden eyes darkened slightly. "If you resist, Ethan, you will be treated as an enemy of the Zirathian Empire." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Let me guess. You'll send warships after me. Bounty hunters. Maybe an execution squad." Zalara took a step forward. "You think this is a joke, but it is not. Calix is of royal lineage. He must be trained, guided, and prepared for the future." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And what if he doesn't want that future?" Zalara frowned. "It is not a choice." Ethan glanced at Calix. "It should be." For the first time, something flickered in Calix's expression. Doubt. Ethan saw it. He saw the way Calix's fingers twitched, the way his eyes darted toward him for just a second before looking away. The boy had never been given a choice. Ethan knelt down again, speaking directly to him. "Calix, do you even know what Earth looks like?" Calix hesitated. "I have studied it." Ethan smiled. "But you've never been there, have you?" Calix shook his head. Ethan looked back at Zalara. "You call yourself his mother, but you've never let him see half of who he is." Zalara's expression didn't change, but Ethan noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. Calix frowned slightly, glancing up at her. "Mother." Zalara hesitated, and that hesitation was all Ethan needed. He turned back to Calix. "How about this? You come with me, just for a little while. See Earth. Meet other humans. If you still want to go back to your mother's empire after that, fine. But at least you'll be making your own choice." Calix blinked, clearly caught off guard by the offer. Zalara stepped forward quickly. "Absolutely not." Ethan smirked. "Why?" Afraid he might actually like it. Zalara's golden eyes flashed. "Do not test me, Ethan." Ethan stepped closer. "Then don't test me. I spent my whole life surviving impossible situations. If you try to take him by force, I'll fight you." The guards around Zalara shifted, gripping their weapons. Zalara studied Ethan for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she let out a small breath and turned to Calix. "Do you wish to go with him?" Calix hesitated. He looked between Ethan and Zalara, then back again. His expression remained neutral, but his hands clenched slightly. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "Yes." Ethan felt his heart pound in his chest. Zalara remained still. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands clenched at her sides for just a second before she finally nodded. "Very well." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, just like that." Zalara turned to him. "You misunderstand, Ethan. This is not a victory for you. This is a test." Ethan frowned. "A test?" Zalara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you fail to protect him, If I find that you are unworthy, I will take him back, and there will be nothing you can do to stop me." Ethan exhaled sharply. Challenge accepted. Calyx looked up at Ethan, then at Selara. "Will I see you again, Mother?" Selara softened, just for a moment. She placed a hand on Calyx's shoulder. "Of course, my son." Then she turned to Ethan one last time. "Do not disappoint me." And with that, she and her guards disappeared into the warship, leaving Ethan alone with his son for the first time in his life. Ethan let out a long breath, then looked down at Calyx. "So, kid, ever been on a smuggler's ship before?" Calyx's lips twitched upward in the smallest hint of a smile. "No, but I would like to." Ethan grinned. "Then let's go see the stars." Ethan Carter sat in the cockpit of the Horizon, watching the stars stretch into infinity as his ship glided through space. But this time, he wasn't alone. Sitting beside him in the co-pilot's seat was Calyx, his son. Ethan still wasn't used to saying that. "My son." It felt strange, like trying on a jacket that didn't quite fit yet. A few hours ago, he hadn't even known Calyx existed. Now, they were traveling together. He glanced at the boy, who sat upright, hands resting neatly in his lap, staring at the control panels with sharp golden eyes. He didn't fidget, didn't slouch. He was too well-trained, too disciplined. Ethan sighed. "All right, kid. Time for some questions." Calyx turned his head slightly. "Questions?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, you know, normal father-son stuff. Like, what do you like to do for fun?" Calyx blinked. "Fun." Ethan frowned. "Don't tell me you don't know what fun is." Calyx hesitated. "Mother says that fun is an inefficient use of time." Ethan groaned. "Oh, we're gonna have to fix that." Calyx tilted his head. "Fix what?" Ethan smirked. "Kid, you've been stuck in a palace learning how to be a prince. But out here, we do things differently. First rule of my ship, fun is required." Calyx frowned slightly, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Ethan gestured toward the control panel. "Ever flown a ship before?" Calyx's posture straightened. "I have studied flight mechanics and Zirathian starship navigation." Ethan chuckled. Yeah, but have you actually flown one?" Calyx hesitated, then shook his head. Ethan grinned. "Well, today's your lucky day." He flicked a few switches, then pointed at the controls. "Go on. Take the wheel." Calyx's eyes widened slightly. "Mother would not allow this." Ethan smirked. "Your mother isn't here, is she?" Calyx looked at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out, placing his small hands on the controls. Ethan guided him through it, showing him how to adjust the thrusters, how to turn gently, how to feel the ship's movements. At first, Calyx was too precise, too calculated, his hands stiff, movements rigid. But as the minutes passed, something changed. He started to relax, to trust his instincts. And then, for the first time since Ethan had met him, Calyx smiled. Just a little. Just for a second. But it was there. Ethan grinned. "There you go, kid. You're a natural." Calyx straightened, regaining his serious expression. "It is enjoyable." Ethan laughed. "See? Told you fun is important." Calyx glanced at him. "Mother says that emotions can be a weakness." Ethan sighed. "Look, your mother's a strong woman, a great leader, but she's wrong about that. Emotions aren't a weakness, kid. They make you human." Calyx was silent for a long moment, as if considering Ethan's words. Finally, he said, "I am only half human." Ethan smiled. "That's still enough. Trouble finds them." Just as Ethan was about to teach Calyx some more flight tricks, the ship's alarms blared loudly. "Warning. Multiple hostiles DTECTE." Ethan cursed and quickly scanned the radar. 3 ships were closing in fast. Calyx stiffened. "Who are they?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Pirates. The comms crackled, and a deep, rough voice came through. Ethan Carter, we know you're carrying something valuable. Surrender your ship, and maybe we won't space you. Ethan smirked. Yeah. And maybe I'll just blast you out of the sky instead. Calyx frowned. Is violence always your first solution? Ethan flipped a few switches, bringing up the ship's shields. Nah, but sometimes it's the fastest one. The pirate ships opened fire. The horizon shook violently as laser blasts slammed into its shields. Calyx gripped the chair. What do we do? Ethan grinned. You wanted to fly. Time for your first lesson in evasive maneuvers. Calyx hesitated only for a second, then nodded. Ethan grabbed the controls, pushing the ship into a steep dive, weaving through asteroid debris as the pirates chased them. All right, kid. We're gonna have to work together on this one. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Calyx's eyes gleamed with excitement. Tell me what to do. Ethan nodded. I'll fly. You handle the shields. See that panel? Adjust the energy flow. Focus power on the side they're shooting from. Calyx moved fast, his hands flying over the controls with precision. Done. The ship rocked again as another blast hit them, but the shields held. Ethan smirked. Good job, kid. Now let's get rid of these guys. He hit a switch, opening fire. The horizon's plasma cannons roared to life, striking one of the pirate ships dead center. It exploded in a fiery blast. Calyx's eyes widened. That was effective. Ethan laughed. You ain't seen nothing yet. The remaining 2 pirate ships kept coming. Calyx adjusted the shields again, and Ethan pulled a risky maneuver, cutting the engines for a second, letting the enemy overshoot them, then firing at their engines. Boom! Another ship down. The last pirate panicked and turned to flee. Ethan smirked. That's right. Run. He didn't chase. He had more important things to focus on. Ethan let out a breath and turned to Calyx. Not bad for your first space battle, huh? Calyx was breathing hard, his golden eyes still glowing with adrenaline. He looked at the control panel, then at Ethan. Then, after a moment, he smiled. It was fun. Ethan grinned. Told you so. As the horizon continued its journey through space, Ethan glanced at Calyx and realized something. This wasn't just about protecting his son anymore. This was about teaching him how to live. The horizon soared through the quiet depths of space, far from the chaos of the pirate attack. Inside the ship, the air was still buzzing with energy. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching Calyx as he studied the control panel with deep concentration. The kid was sharp. Too sharp. Ethan had seen plenty of talented pilots in his time, but Calyx was different. He learned too fast, reacted too quickly. It wasn't just intelligence, it was something else. Ethan crossed his arms. All right, kid. Time for another question. Calyx glanced at him. Another? Ethan smirked. Yeah, this one's important. What exactly did your mother teach you? Calyx tilted his head, considering the question. Mother trained me in Zirathian combat strategy, royal diplomacy, interstellar law, and the history of the Empire. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And? Calyx hesitated. She also trained me in telepathic focus and energy control. Ethan frowned. Telepathic focus. Calyx nodded. Zirathian royals have heightened mental abilities. We can sense emotions, communicate across distances, and... He stopped suddenly, as if realizing he had said too much. Ethan leaned forward. And what? Calyx's golden eyes flickered with uncertainty. I am not supposed to speak of it. Ethan sighed. Kid, if we're gonna travel together, you need to trust me. I don't care what secrets the Zirathians have. I care about you. Calyx was silent for a moment, then exhaled. I can see glimpses of the future. Ethan froze. Come again. Calyx shifted uncomfortably. It is not always clear. Sometimes it is just feelings, sometimes images, but it happens. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Great, so my son is part psychic. Anything else I should know? Can you move things with your mind? Calyx shook his head. No, my abilities are limited. Ethan let out a breath. Well, that's something, at least. A vision of trouble. Calyx looked down, his fingers tightening around the edge of the control panel. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What is it? Calyx hesitated, then spoke quietly. I had a vision before we left. Ethan sat up straight. What did you see? Calyx's golden eyes darkened. Fire. A battle. And mother. Ethan's heart pounded. Your mother? What about her? Calyx swallowed. She was in danger. Ethan felt a wave of unease settle in his chest. Queen Silara wasn't just a ruler. She was one of the strongest leaders in the galaxy. If she was in danger, that meant something serious was happening. Ethan rubbed his chin. You sure about this vision? Calyx nodded. It felt real. Ethan sighed. Of course it did. He stood up, pacing the cockpit. He didn't trust the Zirathians, but Silara had given him a chance to know his son. If she was in trouble, did he really have a choice? Ethan glanced at Calyx. Do you want to go back? Calyx hesitated, then said, I do not know. Mother would not ask for help. But he lowered his voice. I do not want her to die. Ethan sighed. Well, kid, looks like we're heading straight back into trouble. Back to Zirathian space. The Horizon turned course, speeding toward Zirathian territory. Ethan had barely left, and now he was heading back, this time with his son at his side. As they neared the border, the comms crackled. A cold voice came through. Unidentified vessel, you are approaching Zirathian space. Identify yourself. Ethan smirked. Relax. It's just me, Ethan Carter. You remember me, right? There was a long silence. Then, Carter, you should not be here. The Empire is under lockdown. Ethan frowned. Lockdown? What's going on? The voice hesitated. Queen Silara has been taken hostage. Calyx sucked in a sharp breath. Ethan's jaw tightened. So the vision was right. Ethan clicked the comms back on. Who took her? A faction of Zirathian rebels. They demand control of the Empire. If their demands are not met, the Queen will be executed. Calyx's hands clenched into fists. We have to go. Ethan nodded. Agreed. A new mission. Ethan guided the Horizon toward the capital planet of Zirathia. The moment they entered the atmosphere, the ship's radar flashed with enemy signals. Ethan cursed. Looks like the rebels don't want visitors. Calyx turned to him, his eyes burning with determination. Then we must make them regret it. Ethan smirked. That's my boy. As the first enemy ships closed in, Ethan knew one thing. This wasn't just about saving Silara. This was about protecting his family. And he wasn't going to lose. The Horizon cut through Zirathia's atmosphere like a comet, dodging enemy patrols. Inside the cockpit, Ethan's grip was tight on the controls, his pulse steady despite the chaos. He had been in worse situations before, but this time it was personal. Calyx sat beside him, eyes locked on the screens, reading enemy positions. He had barely spoken since hearing about his mother's capture, but his posture was tense. Ethan could tell the boy was trying to control his emotions, just as he had been trained. But this wasn't the time for control. It was time for action. All right, kid, Ethan said. Where are they holding her? Calyx studied the data. The central palace has been sealed, but the security feed shows a large number of energy readings in the underground chambers. Ethan nodded. Makes sense. If I were a rebel, I'd hide in the catacombs. Easy to defend, hard to attack. Calyx turned to him. What is our plan? Ethan smirked. Simple. We sneak in, grab your mother, and blast our way out. Calyx frowned. That does not sound very strategic. Ethan chuckled. That's because you've never done it my way. Landing in a war zone. Ethan guided the ship toward the city outskirts, avoiding the main landing zones. The rebels controlled most of the capital, but they hadn't locked everything down yet. The Horizon touched down in an abandoned market district. Fires burned in the streets, and distant explosions shook the ground. The people of Zerathia were caught between their queen's loyal forces and the rebels. Calyx stared out of the window. I have never seen my home like this. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. War changes everything, kid, but we can fix this. Calyx looked up at him and nodded. The two stepped out, moving swiftly through the ruined city. Ethan led the way, relying on his instincts and years of experience in hostile zones. Calyx followed closely, his sharp golden eyes scanning every shadow. When they reached the palace's underground entrance, 2 rebel guards stood at the gate, rifles in hand. Ethan grinned. Time for some fun. Before Calyx could ask what he meant, Ethan moved. Fast. With a smooth motion, he grabbed a small device from his belt and tossed it. It hit the ground with a soft click, then erupted in a flash of blinding light. The guards shouted, covering their eyes. That was all Ethan needed. He lunged forward, knocking one guard out with a swift punch and disarming the other in seconds. Before the rebels could even react, it was over. Calyx blinked. That was impressive. Ethan grinned. You'll get used to it. Calyx tilted his head. Could I do that? Ethan raised an eyebrow. You want to learn? Calyx hesitated, then nodded. Ethan chuckled. We'll start training after we save your mom. The underground chambers. The two slipped inside, following dimly lit tunnels beneath the palace. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, remnants of Zerathia's past. Calyx ran a hand over the symbols. These tell the story of the first queen, the one who united the planets. Ethan glanced at him. Your mother ever tell you about that? Calyx nodded. She says a true ruler must be strong, must never show fear. Ethan sighed. Kid, strength isn't about hiding fear. It's about doing what's right, even when you're afraid. Calyx looked thoughtful, but said nothing. They continued forward until they reached a massive steel door. Beyond it, voices echoed, rebel soldiers arguing about what to do with their captive queen. Ethan placed a hand on the door, listening. At least 5 guards, armed. Calyx suddenly stiffened. His golden eyes glowed faintly. She is inside. Ethan pulled out his blaster. All right, kid, stay behind me. Calyx frowned. I can fight. Ethan smirked. I know, but let me handle the messy part. Calyx hesitated but nodded. The battle for Xylara. Ethan kicked the door open and fired. The first shot hit a rebel in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. Chaos erupted. The rebels turned their weapons, but Ethan was faster. He rolled, taking cover behind a stone pillar. Blaster bolts whizzed past his head. Xylara sat chained in the center of the room, her violet skin bruised but her eyes burning with defiance. She looked at Ethan and smirked. Took you long enough. Ethan grinned. Yeah, you're welcome. Calyx darted forward, reaching for the control panel on the chains. I can unlock these. Ethan covered him, taking down another rebel. But there were too many. More guards rushed in. Xylara stood, her energy returning. She raised her hands, and the air around her shimmered with power. The rebels froze as if an invisible force was gripping them. Ethan whistled. Wow. Remind me never to make you mad. Xylara smirked, then turned to Calyx. You should not be here. Calyx straightened. I had to come. I saw it. Xylara's expression softened. Your vision. Ethan fired one last shot, knocking out the final rebel. We can talk later. Right now, we need to get out of here. Xylara nodded. I know the way. With their path clear, they rushed back through the tunnels. The battle outside raged on, But Ethan had only one mission now, getting them all out alive. As the horizon came into view, Calyx turned back one last time, looking at the palace, his home. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll come back, kid. We're not done yet." Calyx took a deep breath. "I know." As they took off into the sky, Ethan knew this fight was far from over. The horizon shot through the sky, weaving between enemy patrols as explosions rocked the city below. Ethan gripped the controls, pushing the ship to its limits. They had escaped the palace, but the battle wasn't over yet. In the co-pilot seat, Calyx's golden eyes scanned the tactical display. "Mother, your forces are still fighting in the capital. The rebels have not retreated." Silara stood behind them, her violet skin glowing faintly under the ship's lights. Though she had been captured, she looked as powerful as ever. "They will not surrender so easily," she said. "Their leader, General Vork, believes I am unfit to rule." Ethan scoffed. "Let me guess. He thinks he can do a better job." Silara nodded. "He sees the old ways as weak. He wants to rule through war." Calyx's hands tightened into fists. "He must be stopped." Ethan smirked. "I like the way you think, kid." Silara looked at her son, then at Ethan. "We cannot run. This is our fight." Ethan sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." He checked the fuel reserves and weapon systems. "All right. What's the plan?" Silara stepped forward. "We strike at the heart of their operation, their command ship." Calyx nodded. "If we take it down, the rebels will be leaderless." Ethan grinned. "Now that's a plan I can work with." The attack begins. The horizon turned sharply, heading straight for the rebel fleet. The enemy warships hovered over the city like giant shadows, their weapons firing down at Silara's remaining forces. Ethan switched the ship to full power. "Hold on tight." The first wave of enemy fighters closed in. Blaster fire streaked across the sky. Ethan rolled the ship, dodging every shot with expert precision. Calyx's eyes gleamed with focus. 3 ships on our tail." Ethan smirked. "Not for long." He flipped a switch, releasing a barrage of countermeasures. Bright energy flares exploded behind them, confusing the enemy's targeting systems. The pursuing ships hesitated for just a second, and that was all Ethan needed. He spun the horizon, locking onto the nearest enemy fighter. With a quick pull of the trigger, a plasma blast struck the rebel ship, sending it spiraling down in flames. Calyx's voice was calm. 2 more incoming." Silara raised her hand, her eyes glowing with royal power. The air inside the ship shimmered with unseen energy. Outside, the 2 remaining enemy fighters suddenly veered off course, as if something had yanked them away. They crashed into each other, exploding in a brilliant fireball. Ethan whistled. "I'll admit, that's impressive." Silara smirked. "I know." Boarding the command ship, the horizon approached the rebel command ship, a massive war cruiser floating above the capital. Ethan maneuvered carefully, dodging laser turrets as Calyx scanned for a landing point. There, a maintenance hatch on the lower deck. Ethan brought the ship in close. "All right, we don't have much time. We get in, take out Vork, and end this." Calyx looked at his mother. "Will you fight with us?" Silara's expression was fierce. "Of course." The landing ramp lowered, and the 3 of them jumped out, weapons ready. The ship's corridors were dark and quiet, but Ethan knew that wouldn't last. They moved quickly, heading toward the bridge. But just as they reached a wide corridor, the doors at both ends slammed shut. A deep voice echoed through the ship. "So, the Queen returns." From the shadows, General Vork stepped forward. His armor gleamed under the dim lights, and his piercing red eyes locked onto Silara. "You should have stayed in your prison, Your Majesty." His voice was filled with cold amusement. "Now, you will die." Silara stood tall. "You have betrayed our people, Vork." Vork smirked. "No, I have freed them. The empire must be strong, and strength comes from conquest. Ethan rolled his eyes. Great speech, pal. Too bad it ends here. Vorik laughed. You are nothing, human. This is not your fight. Calyx stepped forward. It is my fight. Vorik's eyes narrowed. The boy. So you live. A half-blood abomination. Silara's energy flared, her anger barely contained. You will not speak of my son that way. Vorik smirked. It does not matter. You will not leave this ship alive. With a motion of his hand, rebel soldiers poured into the corridor. The final battle. Ethan reacted instantly. Blaster fire filled the air. Silara unleashed a wave of energy, knocking several rebels back. Calyx dodged a strike and grabbed a fallen blaster, his aim steady as he fired back. Ethan took cover behind a pillar, taking down enemy after enemy with precise shots. But Vorik was still standing, watching, waiting. Then he moved. In a blur, Vorik lunged at Silara, his blade glowing with dark energy. Silara met his strike with her own, their weapons clashing in a flash of power. Calyx's breath caught. His mother was strong, but Vorik was relentless. Ethan saw it too. Kid, Ethan shouted, we need to help her. Calyx's eyes glowed with fierce determination. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then moved. Faster than before, stronger than before. He dodged blaster fire, leaped forward, and threw his weapon straight at Vorik. The blade slammed into Vorik's armor, knocking him off balance. That was all Silara needed. With one final strike, she drove her energy blade through Vorik's chest. The general staggered, eyes wide in shock. Silara whispered, the Empire does not need war. It needs hope. Vorik collapsed. The remaining rebels hesitated, then surrendered. A new beginning. With Vorik gone, the rebellion crumbled. Silara's forces reclaimed the capital, and peace slowly returned. Standing on the palace balcony, Ethan looked out at the recovering city. He felt a presence beside him. Calyx. You did good, kid, Ethan said. Calyx looked up at him. What happens now? Ethan smirked. That's up to you. Silara stepped forward. You have a place here, Ethan. Ethan looked at her, then at his son. He grinned. I think I'll stick around. As the sun rose over Zerathia, Ethan knew one thing. This was only the beginning.